Hello. It's time for a session on handicrafts by Professor Ashoke Chatterjee. Professor Chatterjee has a background in the engineering industry, international civil service, and ITDC, and has spent 25 years in the service of the NID Ahmedabad, where he was executive director, senior faculty, distinguished fellow, and professor of communication and management. He serves as advisor to the Center of Heritage Management at Ahmedabad University, where he is editor of the Journal of Heritage Management. The session will be complemented with a screening or an excerpt from the screening of Notes from a Craftsman, a documentary by Tilla by Aratrik Devvarman that explores the work and life of 5 craftspeople, 3 printers, a dyer, and a bead worker. Shot over 2 years in their homes and workshops, it captures their worldviews and records the changing landscape of the city of Ahmedabad while its crafts adapt to stay relevant. I would request everyone to please welcome Professor Ashoke Chatterjee with a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to be back in Calcutta, Kolkata, Mahanagar, whatever you want to call it, which is such a great city and to which I owe a great deal. Although my name is Chatterjee, I'm not a proper bong, I'm a bogus bong, but so many things are bogus in this world that maybe that's not so bad after all. But what I do want to say, and want to respond to what was said that nobody comes to Calcutta, this is just not true. And if there is an edge of frustration that you feel, there's a much greater edge of frustration in those of us who have tried to get Bengal to come to us, or Calcutta to come to us. But because we are in this space, I think it should be said that there's a particular value for Calcutta being a little bit more entrepreneurial. The last presentation was about creative and cultural industries. And yesterday we had the example of Durga Puja as a hugely important indicator of how important this sector is. I'm grateful to Vikas ji for what he's helped me to cut short my lecture, because he's given a lot of the issues that I would have brought up if he hadn't already brought that up. Because the creative and cultural industries sector, now be careful when you use these words, creative and cultural industries. One of the reasons why it's been very frustrating for me personally to try and work with Calcutta and with Bengal is that the word industry is seen as something subversive to art. So the minute you say industry, then this horrible thing coming, commercialization. And I was just telling your colleagues, there isn't time to develop on this. I could take up your whole day to just give you this saga. But the man who first opened our eyes to cultural and creative industries, and I underline that word industries, was Rabindranath Tagore. And he did this in 1919, after returning to Calcutta and to Vishwabharati from a visit to the Bauhaus. And the Bauhaus, as all those of you who are design students would know, is the origin of the design profession as we understand it today. He visits the Bauhaus in 1919 and comes back and starts his experiments in Bolpur at Shilpa Sadan, or whatever it was called in those days. And his design experiments, several decades later, stop. I mentioned this yesterday, so I won't repeat it here. And the reasons why it stopped is probably the same reasons why people like me, who have been trying to get the Calcutta and Bengal story widely appreciated outside, find it so difficult. Because there is this almost a stigma attached to the whole question of culture being an industry. But as we've heard from the former speaker, that is exactly what it is, and it is exactly what it has been for generations. The crafts, which is the subject of my time with you this afternoon, is one part of the creative and cultural industries in this country. One part, probably the largest. And I say probably because, as Vikasji has already mentioned, we don't have the data. Okay? And what cannot be counted is usually dismissed and falls through the cracks as being marginal. The real things that matter are what can be counted. And I think it was mentioned in this last session that it is difficult to actually measure. And I'll start with that, because I'm trying to end with that, to say it is not. There are both quantitative indicators and there are qualitative indicators. And qualitative indicators can be measured. And here again, we owe a debt to Calcutta. Because the measurement of those qualitative indicators began here, or perhaps in Shantiniketan, through Amartya Sen and his colleagues, including Mehboob ul Haq of Pakistan. India and Pakistan working together, not the governments, but as individuals, helped develop the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals are about measuring, now be careful about this, measuring what? Human progress. They are a revolt by Mehboob ul Haq, Amartya Sen, other one or two economists who worked with them, Professor Richard Jolly and others, to move away from the idea that you can measure a nation's progress through per capita statistics or gross domestic product. Those are the measurements we usually hear about: per capita income, gross development production. But as Robert Kennedy once said, GDP measures everything except what makes us human. And that's where you come in, and that's where design comes in. The design is all about well-being, the quality of our lives, and what makes us human. And that can be measured. Your generation has a chance which my generation did not have, because we did not have this weapon, this tool of measurement which you now have. So there's no excuse any longer for the kind of neglect of the cultural sector and of the creative sector. But don't wait for governments to do that. They will not do it. This session is supposed to be about policy, and policy is a hugely complex area of investigation. Yeah? Policy is what defeated Gurudev and his Vishwabharati, because his policy towards cultural and creative industries was opposed by people who thought fine arts should be at the top of a hierarchy, and crafts and working with your hands was somewhere below. So the caste system, if you like, entered and finished what he wanted to do. But in our investigation of this extraordinary history, Gurudev is credited nowhere in this country, except by a few of us sitting in Ahmedabad and in Delhi, as the one who initiated industrial design in India. We don't link him to the building of the Howrah Bridge or the metro, or what is happening now, where everyone is talking about design thinking, quote unquote. Right? He started it. But he has a phrase which he used, which I found when I was researching this, which is so important. He uses the phrase, life in its completeness, which is the phrase Gurudev uses to explain why hand activity and craft activity is so important to the way we think and the values that we hold. Now, I'm going to tell a big story, but I only have a limited time to do that. Before I do that, I want you to see a clip of a film made by a designer from this region, a beautiful film that you can see online. But the reason I want you to see this film, and you're not going to see it all because it'll take too much time and bell will be ringing, and I don't want that to happen, is just to bring into this room for a few minutes who these people are, who should matter to us if we really believe that cultural and creative industries is as important as it should be. Can we have the film? And we'll stop it in between, but at least you'll hear their voices and see their faces, and you will then understand, I hope, and take back with you why what we are saying today in the Imami Center is so important. Can we have the film, please? So that you can keep that little image of this great lady saying almost exactly the same thing as Gurudev said. Life in its completeness. That's what she wanted, that's what she got out of her hands. And that sense of touch and feel that this little film shows you, it's a very rich film, I encourage you to see it, is the essence of what you've just heard about cultural and creative industries and what you have seen of where our crafts actually come out from. You'll understand why it's so difficult to measure and to count. As you heard Aditi Ranjan say, so many people are involved in one fabric. Who do you count? Who do you leave out? All these are issues of policy, and this session is supposed to be about policy. So let me give you a background, keeping this in mind, that we are in a subcontinent which has the longest history of hand activity unbroken in the entire world. The issue that we are talking about is sustainability, and there is a book which has just come out, and I'm leaving this with Ushmita Ben to share with all of you. This is a compendium of writers talking about sustainability in the craft sector, which is only one part of the creative and cultural industries. Incidentally, in the statistics you just heard about the size of this sector, several years ago, the creative and cultural industries was calculated as larger than petroleum and larger than armaments in terms of economic value. So we're not talking about something at the fringe, we're talking about something in the center. And as you also heard, there are 30 ministries and departments in New Delhi whose activities impinge on those visuals, those people in the visuals that you saw. They never come together. The only time they ever did was at the Planning Commission in 2014 as part of an effort to measure. 30 departments and ministries. 8 ministries arrived at the meeting. 1 ministry did not. Can you guess which ministry that was? the Ministry of Culture. Amongst the madness of these ministries that attended that meeting was one particular madness which only, because we are like that only India could do. The ministry that is in charge of what you saw on the screen and many other crafts is the Ministry of Textiles. How many of our crafts in this country are not textiles? If you have any doubt about that, I hope you all have in your libraries Handmade in India, a directory put together by my former colleague Aditi Ranjan, who you saw on the screen. 7 years of work to put together that directory. 7 years. The Ministry of Textiles is in charge of, they have two development commissioners, Development Commissioner of Handlooms and Development Commissioner of Handicrafts. Between them, the Ministry of Textiles recognizes between 11 and 16 million artisans. That's not a small number. However, the number is much greater than that. We heard a figure of 450 million. I don't know whether that's correct. We don't know. We don't know because we don't count. And because we don't count, what those people you saw on the screen do does not go into the national systems of accounting. And because they don't go into the national systems of accounting, investment does not go there. I point this out, particularly when I'm sitting here in Calcutta, because if you don't take your industries seriously, if you don't take the lesson of Durga Puja seriously, where the hell is the investment going to come from? As we've just heard from the previous speaker, if I am investing in anything, I want to know. And the first thing I want is the data. You don't have the data. But something is happening about that. And as we speak, something that is happening in West Bengal has just been completed. But I'll come to that later. Let me just say that if we're talking about sustainability, what is it that you want to sustain about this sector? What is it? Is it an object? Is it a product? Or is it something else? The last speaker spoke about skill development, which is the great buzzword that we hear from our politicians today. Of course, craft is about skill. But the people you heard on the screen have much more than just skill. They have wisdom. And if you don't respect that wisdom and talk about them as if they're just skilled hands, it's much more than that. It's what they have up here. And yet, in the system of education that we have, these people are not seen as wise teachers. I received a rude letter from the Ministry of Education one year when I was the director of NID to say, how could I possibly allow an artisan to walk in the convocation procession along with qualified people? That's the extent of idiocy that we are capable of in a country with the largest, one of the countries of the subcontinent with the largest resource of artisanal wisdom. It's not just people, it's their wisdom. Now, the policy environment, we can go back, but we don't have time to. I'm going to rush through this for you. The policy environment for the craft sector begins with the freedom struggle. As all of you know, Gandhiji, Tagore, and others put crafts at the center of the freedom struggle. A country overthrows a colonial power, and in that process uses handcraft as a tool for liberation. That's something very special. Do we realize that? Freedom comes after a bloody partition. The policy is to take handicrafts into centralized planning. But before that, there is this brutal birth of two nations carved out of what was one nation and both bathed in blood. Refugees pour into New Delhi. What to do with these people? Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay, who is seen as sort of the mother of Indian crafts, is asked by Jawaharlal Nehru, do something. She walks into Purana Killa, into the refugee camp, with cloth, needle and thread. And she asks the women who had gone through this brutal experience of partition to make something that gave them hope. Keep that in mind when you think of the value of crafts. What do we value? Her idea was make something beautiful just to recover from this terribly traumatic experience. And they did. They created pulkaris. Those pulkaris had to be sold. So the next policy move is to set up what later became the Central Cottage Industries Emporium. Now, at that time, the first 5-year plan is being drafted, and crafts moves into the center of that drafting process, opposed by many from Bengal. Why? Because those politicians belonged to the leftist parties who said all this craft business is bourgeoisie, middle class nonsense, exploitive. So there was that battle to be fought. But crafts came in to the first 5-year plan. And also at that time, another policy decision is taken because India desperately needed foreign exchange. So then the handcraft was seen as something that could be exported to bring in foreign exchange. So another policy decision is made that exports is a very important part of our national endeavor. Craft exports, because there is a demand for Indian handmade quality, so promote crafts for that reason. That's the only part of the craft sector for which data is available, is the export part. But the issue here is that you have this whole issue of crafts moving into centralized planning, and in centralized planning, you have to excuse me, I'm losing my eyesight, so I have difficulty reading my notes. But the Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay and later another outstanding woman, and the craft sector is dominated by women, and you saw that on the screen, that great lady giving it, Mrs. Pupul Jayakar. For both of them, crafts was critically important. But neither of them, alas, paid enough attention to the economics of the craft sector, as we heard from the previous speaker. The result of this was that although great institutions were set up, you had the All India Handicrafts Board, you had the Weavers Service Center, which you're celebrating here, you had the NID being set up, the Crafts Council of India was set up. Here in Calcutta, you had pioneering organizations like Bengal Home Industries and Valoris out in Naihati. All of these were contributing to what was happening in the craft sector, but there was still no clear craft policy. And the problem with that was that whereas this activity is moving and a lot of good things were done, The issue was that the data was not being collected, the definitions were not clear. What is a craft? Do you include brickmaking as a craft, or paupers or chutney, or do you leave those out? And if you do, why? So the complexity of this huge industry was never investigated. And we are now paying the price for that. Some years ago, the Crafts Council of India, which was set up by Kamladevi Chattopadhyay, we got a severe kick in the pants, and we got it at the highest levels of policy making. We got it almost from the Prime Minister's office, not quite, but pretty close. And we were told, and I'm talking about the year around 2010, well into this century, that crafts is a sunset industry. That term was used, sunset. So let the sun set. This is not about global power. It is not about India's aspirations of the future. It is not about a modern India. This came as a shock to us, because the heritage of Gandhi and Tagore and Kamladevi and Pupul Jayakar and all of those people, including the entry of crafts into India's diplomacy through the festivals of India that took place throughout the world under the leadership of Pupul Jayakar, we thought nobody could ever question even the possibility of an India without handcrafts. And here we were being told, why are you wasting your time? In fact, I was told that you know what you should do, Chatterjee? You should be encouraging artisans to go into IT. Nothing more absurd had I heard until that point, but it was a wake-up call. Soon thereafter, after this conversation, I and my Crafts Council colleagues were in China at the meeting of the World Crafts Council in a part of China which is craft-rich. The gentleman who came down from Beijing to open this conference said that in the year 2004, China had identified two industries, policy decision, two industries, as critical to its rise as a world power. Can you guess what those industries were? IT and handcraft. And why? The gentleman pointed to the experience of the Japanese and the East Asian tigers, to Scandinavia and to Italy. The craft sector is where innovation and creativity are seeded. You lose your craft sector, you lose your ability to create and to innovate. It's not just about handmade, it's about the impact of the handmade across all sectors of the economy and of national life. And this, the gentleman from Beijing said, were China's sunrise industries. We rushed to the translator's booth to find out if he'd actually used the term sunrise, and we were assured that he had. Sunrise in China, sunset in India. So much for the policy environment. But when you see these, you begin to wonder, why is this happening? Why was India not the country to say that these are our sunrise industries? After all, you've thrown out the British with the power of the charkha. Why has it now suddenly become sunset? And one of the issues here was that it's a question of mindset. We realized that we were up against something. We also realized that in all the years that the Crafts Council of India had been in existence, we had never had an economist on our team. So was it our fault? Our ignorance? We realized after what we had heard at the Planning Commission that the fault was also ours. We had not taken crafts seriously enough as an industry. We didn't have the data. The question that was thrown at me was, Chatterjee, where's the data that you're so important? Show me the figures. We didn't have the figures. By that time, the Crafts Council had been around for 20 years. Why the hell didn't we have the figures? Because we never had an economist on our team. We never thought this was important. Whose job is it to get the figures? We then discovered, didn't discover, we finally, to cut a long story short, went to the Tata Trust, got a small amount of money, and did a pilot project in Tamil Nadu and in Kutch to see if there was a method of finding the data for this sector. It took us 2 years. We took that data to the Planning Commission and said, you kicked us in the pants a few years ago. This is what we've done. Do we have something which is rigorous? And they said, yes, you do. And they sent us across to Sardar Patel Bhavan, where the 6th economic census of India was about to commence. This census counts entrepreneurs, people who take their products to market. For the first time since independence, artisans were included by the Economic Census 2016. And they were included because we, NGOs, civil societies, banged on tables, fought and screamed and got it in. So if you're waiting for the government of India to do everything, it won't happen. We have to do it as civil society. The 6th economic census was a watershed event because it not only counted some of the craft sector, but it gave us a new term. The people we have counted are craft entrepreneurs. Use that phrase when you're looking for support. We have the data to show that there are these many craft entrepreneurs in this country, and that number goes well beyond what the Government of India recognizes through the Ministry of Textiles. The Government of India, through the Ministry of Textiles, recognizes between 11 to 16 million artisans, but the figure, as we have heard, is much higher than that. Now the fun began. An NGO cannot do this on a national scale. The statisticians who worked with us said there needs to be a special methodology which is specific to the craft sector in order to do a census on handmade in India. We don't have the methodology. Whose job is it to do the methodology? Government of India, of course. We went to the ministries, Ministry of Textiles, Niti Aayog, and several others. At every stage, the doors were slammed in our face. Not necessary. In fact, one official of the Ministry of Textiles said the craft sector is too small to merit a census. COVID struck. We were desperate. But COVID gave us a chance to get our heads straight, to do the planning, and to start fundraising. To cut a very long story short, we were able to raise the money for a methodological study in 5 states of this country, including West Bengal, which is now, the figures are being crunched. When these figures are crunched, we will have a methodology. But to do a national census is obviously not something any NGO can do. All this is about counting. It's about measuring. It's about statistics. But I think we've heard enough in these past couple of days to know that the importance of this sector goes well beyond statistics. it's about those human values, of which you got a short glimpse just now. And if you go upstairs to the 4th floor, there are all those great artisans up there whose stories will be very similar to what you've heard here. So where do we go from here? This exercise, it took us 14 years of banging on doors and banging on tables and praying to raise the money to do this methodological study. The chief statistician of India, Dr. Pranab Sen, said to us, if you are to undertake such a study, you've got to get it right. You cannot even start the study until you have raised at least 1 crore, so that you can cover at least 5 states, because you need that rigor. You cannot afford to do a study in a sloppy way, because then your sector will be dismissed as being incapable of economic rigor. We've done that. We've done that. The figures are being crunched now. By March, the results will be out. But the question then will be, who will take this methodology and who will apply it at a national level? We are not capable of that. But the interesting point for you in this long battle that we've had, which has taken more than 20 years of my life, is that the only ones who are willing to listen to us and give us support have been statisticians. The very last place, the Ministry of Statistics, that I thought would ever be interested. They understand what we are doing. They have supported us and they've encouraged us. And every time we've almost given up, they've said, don't give up. Because what you are doing is absolutely essential. And the gentleman who was in charge of this ministry said to me, when we went to him to get this into the 6th economic census, all the forms for the census had already been printed in every Indian language. And they were up to the ceiling in Sardar Patel Bhavan. And he said, I suppose you have been told that I will throw you out of this office if you ask me to put crafts into this, because all those forms will have to be reprinted. But I will give you only one question that you can add to those forms. And I'll tell you why I am doing this. Because I started my career, he said, in Nagaland. And I know how important this is. And I know this has been neglected. And thank God there's somebody before my career is over who's doing something about it. So we knew from the chief statistician of India that we were on the right track. So this is the kind of challenge that there is in this. Now let me come to the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals are the international UN mandated measurements for human progress. Not just economic progress, but human progress. Not just Mr. Adani, but that lady who spoke about what had happened to her. 17 goals, out of which the craft sector addresses 11 of these goals directly. Not just indirect, not just directly. No other Indian industry does that. We have challenged the Ministry of Industry, we have challenged the Ministry of Small and Medium Industries. My time is over. 10 minutes, okay. We've challenged them. Who else can claim to address 11 out of 17 Sustainable Development Goals? No industry. When COVID struck, the government of India had delegations and seminars about how to protect automobiles, IT, and God knows what else. Not a single meeting was held to protect the artisans of India. Not one. And those millions of people who are walking the roads to get back to their villages, 60% of them are estimated to have been artisans, thrown out of city slums and wanting to go home. The craft sector was almost alone in coming through the COVID crisis resilient. This is extremely important for people to understand. Tested by fire, nobody could have anticipated COVID. The craft sector came through that. The craft sector did not give up hope. It has come through stronger after COVID than it was before COVID. And I, who have worked with the craft sector for at least half my career, I could never have anticipated this. But they did. So what is the policy challenge now? The artisans upstairs on the 4th floor are contributing to 11 of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. When India reports its progress on the SDGs, as we have to twice a year, their contribution is never included. Just think of that. The country with the largest resource of artisanal skill and wisdom in the world, the country which this sector, as a sector contributing to 11 of 17 goals, when it reports to the United Nations, it leaves out what they do. And why does it leave it out there, what they do? Because, as the previous speaker mentioned, there is not the data. Now you can see how absolutely absurd our situation is. But we are hoping in the Crafts Council of India and our partners that when this methodology is out, we will come back to Imami Center and to other places to build a community of people who understand how important this is. And who understand that if we lose this chance, God knows if it will ever come back again. Because the attitude to dismiss artisans is current, alive, and well. I have an article here which I was reading on the plane coming to your conference. It talks about the crisis in the economy now taking place, which is a slowdown, and what should be done to arrest it. And they say the way to arrest it is to encourage industries which will employ large numbers of people, industries which will have a low carbon footprint, and industries which are non-farm. And it never mentions craft. So we seem to be invisible at every level. And that invisibility has got to stop. And the only way to stop it is to put the data on the table. Because a politician, if he is told not 16 million, but 250 million, which is our estimate, and we've just heard 400 million. 250 million for the craft sector. But how many of those operations are we counting? Are we counting only the weaver, or the pre-loom and post-loom and distribution? That's what we're trying to figure out now, how to count. And the sector may come out even larger than we imagine. We are sharing everything that we do with our colleagues in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Brazil, and Mexico, UK, and Scandinavia. The problem of counting this sector is worldwide. But everyone is astonished that India has taken its craft sector so casually. In fact, in China, the gentleman who said Sunrise Industries said to me, the only country we should be scared of is you. But we're not, because you people are so stupid. That's the term he used. You're speaking in Chinese, his interpreter said stupid. And what he meant was that you have this huge resource of creativity and innovation, and you don't know that you're sitting on this wealth. So the answer to all this now is that at the policy level, we should stop expecting the government to change. We have to force the government to change. And one way to force the government to change is to create a community of people who understand what they're talking about, who are capable of backing what their interest with field work, which is what we have had to do, and who can contribute to taking this methodology to a scale that it deserves, and to my mind, and we are dedicating all our work to Gurudev because he understood it 100 years ago. And if he understood it then and he was disappointed, it's our job to make up for that and to ensure that this doesn't happen to your generation and to the generations that will follow. I'll leave you with this thought that the power of design, we were hearing yesterday about this whole question of what is design. Whatever you want to call it, it's extremely powerful. And the power of that design is not just in economic terms, but which I have spent the last 3 years of my life writing, is the story of one community of artisans in Rajasthan over 50 years. When we started working with this community was eating once in 2 days. Living in the deserts of Rajasthan, they were forbidden from drinking from the village well. You can imagine what that means, because of their caste. The power of working with the community, which we heard today, and the power of design intervention, and the power of the wisdom that they carry through their heritage, has brought them through these 50 years. Today, they are amongst the most respected artisan communities. They are designers in their own rights. They eat far more than twice in one day. And they have access to the village well. And it is a powerful demonstration of what this combination of design, craft, and management can together create in terms of creating a better future. So on that hopeful note, let's hope that that your generation will wake up to an environment far more positive and far more hopeful than some of us have had to go through. Thank you very much.